Okay, it is 6:30, so I'm going to call to order a meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It is Monday, June 12th, 2023, and we are in the OSD Innovation Center at Oregon High School. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Here. Dr. Bush? Here. Ms. Garrison? Dr. Lakuta? Mr. Pankratz? Here. Ms. Wright? Here. Ms. Flanagan?
Present. Board does have a quorum, and two board members that are not here this evening, or one is out of town and one cannot be here for other reasons, so we are good because we do have a quorum. I do have from Ms. Heitz that this meeting has been properly noticed, so we are good there. On our agenda tonight, we do have the consent calendar, and then we have quite a few action items, and then the board will go into closed session and not return into open session. So that is our agenda for the evening, so I will entertain a motion to approve that agenda. Is there a second? Second. All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Moving on to the consent calendar, we do have the following donations, which I will read. $266.47 for the choral music for Prairie View Elementary Chorus from the Oregon Choral Boosters, $412 for field trip transportation from the Friends of the Orchestra, $20 donation to German 8th grade New Glarus field trip from Kristen Evans, then $86.10 for the purchase of binders for the Netherwood Knoll Choir from the Oregon Choral Boosters, $340 for transportation for the Oregon Middle School choir students to go to the Overture Center. That's from the Oregon Choral Boosters as well. $1,000 from Pure Integrity Homes for the Pure Integrity Homes Scholarship. $570 from the Oregon Choral Boosters for transportation for Rome Corners and Forest Edge choir students to the Overture Center. $8,000 from One Community Bank for the scoreboard sponsorship. $500 from the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin for the OMS Forest Restoration. $100 from the Way family for the splash pad, and then $100 from Brad Ashmore for the A-Team Scholarship, $100 from Katie Heitz for the A-Team Scholarship. So thank you to those entities and those individuals for those very important donations, especially the Oregon Choral Boosters, who did quite a bit on this. So I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll move that.
Is there a all right, we have a motion and a second. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Moving on to B, information items. Is there anyone here for public comment? Seeing none, we'll do one more time. Is anyone here for public comment? Okay, moving on. OEA report. I don't believe the OEA is here this evening either. And then student report, since it is now officially summer, we will see our students return in the fall. So moving right along to see action items. So first on the agenda for action items is girls lacrosse cooperative resolution. And then we have the contracts and then the resolution for the boys lacrosse and the cooperative contract. So Brittany, why don't you come on up? I'll turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom first, but you'll be up here for any questions we have.
She will. Thank you, Ms. Spencer-Grant, for being here for questions this evening. So previously, the board approved joining a boys and girls lacrosse consortium starting for the 23-24 school year. And now we're returning with recommendations on state statute required resolutions and the accompanying contracts that, if approved, would be sent to the consortium member schools for their board approval. So we'll start with our girls, and Ms. Jonan is the author of the resolution.
Thank you. So I just wanted to explain legally the process today. Since this is a new cooperative and a joint agreement with the districts, that one of the DPI requirements is that the board approve the contract by resolution. So just to keep it really clean for DPI and WIA purposes, what we would like to ask the board to do tonight is to consider the resolution and the contract separately for both boys and girls. So the resolution just lays out the statutory criteria that the state law and DPI administrative code requires in order to enter into a cooperative contract. So we just tried to give a little background, even though I know we've talked about this before, and then ensure that our contract and our resolution do meet the legal requirements.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion for the resolution for girls lacrosse.
I'll move to approve the resolution for
All right.
girls.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, is there any discussion?
I have a question.
Go ahead on.
Thank you. So I just have a question about the agreement and the funding. So I know we talked about this, but one thing I noticed on tonight's agenda, we also have the hockey agreement. And in the hockey agreement, it specifically identifies that if the if the cost to run the program exceeds what was identified as part of the program or the budget, that the Booster Club picks that up. I'm curious if there's I didn't see any specific language in here, and this is a brand new program. I guess two questions. One,
Just 1 second though. Do we need to discuss that as part of the contract, not the resolution? Because we're just on the resolution, so I just want to do a point of clarification.
yep, you're right.
If it's,
That's okay.
I mean, if it's important to you in terms of approving the resolution, then I would be fine. Otherwise, we could also wait until the contract.
It is a contract question, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to make
Yep.
sure that we were kind of following what we needed to do. So, okay, so let's start with the resolution. Does anybody have any questions about the actual resolution language? Okay, we do have a motion on the floor, so no more discussion. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Bija?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Pinckretts?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Okay, moving on to the girls lacrosse cooperative contract. Do you want to do a little bit of an overview, Brittany, before we get into discussion or questions?
Sure.
Okay.
So the cooperative contract that you see before you, we kind of took a few that the one that we're a part of with girls hockey, we kind of used that as a guide. And I actually reached out to a couple different school districts too, just to see what their cooperative contract language looks like. And that's how we kind of came up with this one. Worked with Andy on it, worked with Gina on it. Dr. Bergstrom had her hands on it too. So we really tried to put everything into here that we felt, could be at play. Throughout the season. Transportation, as we discussed at one of our previous meetings, is going to be on the onus of the local school to kind of get their kids to us, and then we'll cover all transportation for events that are not on site here. The big one that comes up then is kind of the budget. We did our best estimates with the budget there, and there's one thing that we added since the last time you saw this, and we added an estimate for indirect costs into the budget. Things like the time of my department in terms of scheduling games, officials, event workers, and that sort of stuff. So that is a new addition to the budget estimate that you see today.
And it's connected to the line under the budget component of the contract.
In number 5.
Related to
Yeah.
Audit costs, administrative salaries, services, physical services, custodial services, everything that's really difficult to parse out for just lacrosse. We used indirect service rate that is used through special education. Is that correct?
For grants.
It's for grants. Thank you. So we took that rate, which is 4.3, and used that to establish the indirect cost fee for this.
Okay, Anna, we'll start with you because I know you had a question, so floor is yours.
Yeah, I guess just two questions. One is, are these numbers, do you feel, fairly conservative for what we expect the program to be? And how comfortable are we, I guess, with that? And second, if it does cost more than what we're budgeting, how are those dollars recouped through either the other schools or through another mechanism?
Yeah, so the budget, I hope that I'm actually over on my estimates. So I'm trying to budget appropriately. I used some financials that the local lacrosse club was able to provide for me in terms of what it has cost them in recent years to run these programs. I also used our own district numbers in terms of things like coaching salaries because we would pay comparable to what we're already doing. So I tried to kind of blend some of those things. I used kind of some nice rounding up in terms of like transportation estimates and things like that. I do think we also have an opportunity to work with the lacrosse club to possibly buy like uniforms from them since they won't need them any longer. So the uniform cost maybe won't be quite as high, but that's something that we still need to work through with them. But in terms of how the cost is going to be split, we won't absorb any excess solely on us. The way this reads is that we would kind of share the expense on a per pupil basis. So that percentage would be allocated based on how many kids are on the team per school.
So that's a great explanation. Thank you. As far as the process for collecting the funding, right? So it looks like there was kind of some timeline by June 30th. Is that for the following year or is that for the year they just finished?
It'd be for the year they just finished. So the idea is that once the season starts, we'll kind of give it 2 weeks to figure out, who's in and who's out. And then that's the number that we were going to use for invoicing. With spring break kind of in the mix, we thought give ourselves a little bit of a buffer. So I think that's where the April 5th date came from in terms of when we would send the invoices. And then we're asking the districts to have everything settled by the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, just a couple of, I think, really clarification questions. So under the administration section, I understand that we would hire the coaches. So does that mean that we would post it, do all the interviews, and make the selection
Yes.
without input from other schools?
Yes.
Schools?
However, we could potentially look to form a committee if other schools had interest. I know with girls hockey, that was not something that we were a part of in terms of hiring the coaches, but
And then just to follow up on that, in terms of like performance evaluation of the program and staff, I know for other sports we do family surveys after the season's over. Would we do the same thing for these co-ops, or do we do the same things like for girls hockey?
I know for girls hockey, we survey our own families on the co-op. I've never received a survey from Stoughton to share with our co-op families, but I do think that could be something that we could share with our cooperating districts to ask for feedback on that survey.
Yeah, that would be my suggestion, is that we do get comprehensive feedback from all participants, and that comes through, so it doesn't get, just so that we're understanding of how the programs are operating.
For sure.
So that's all I had. Thanks.
Go ahead, Leslie.
So mine is a question for Andy, just on how something works. With the indirect costs, a lot of these costs are obviously already kind of in our budget, like Brittany and all those kind of things. How, can you just do a very simplification of like, what does that look like for us? Like, does it then come off of something else, or does that, how does that work?
No, essentially it would free up those dollars, the $1,100 would be available for
From-
whatever we wanted to do with them at that point.
For other items on the district? Okay, that's what I wanted to find out. Thank you.
You bet.
Caleb, anything?
A couple things, maybe. So the annual budget is the budget for the entire program, right? That will be prorated based on the number of participants from each school.
Correct.
So that's total. Do we have a sense of what that breakdown looks like? I mean, I know you're looking into the future a little bit, but
By school?
yeah. Do you have a sense of that?
Yes. If I dig back.
I'm just curious.
That was data that we had to collect for the cooperative contract agreement with the WIA. So I do have those projections. Next year, the best guess is that we might have 1 female from Broadhead, 2 females from Evansville. I'm just making sure I'm looking at the right gender. 4 females from McFarland, 27 females from Oregon, and 4 females from Stoughton. And then on the male side, 1 male from Broadhead, 2 from Evansville, 1 from McFarland, 58 from Oregon, and 2 from Stoughton is the best estimate that I was able to get.
58, holy cow. One other question. I remember I looked at a lot of contracts the last 24 hours.
Welcome to the board.
Yeah. So, if I remember, on the hockey contract, there's a cost for the families. If I remember, I'm not gonna be able to find it.
Yeah, it's split. I know what you're talking about.
Right. There's nothing like that in this contract. So is there no cost for like the families on the other than I guess probably equipment and things like that?
Sure. So what they do in the hockey one is it says there's X number of dollars per pupil, and then there's an ice fee also. And so what their recommendation is that the $850 fee is the one that gets passed on to the families, and then that schools absorb the remainder of the fee. Now, how districts actually choose to pay that is not necessarily in line with how their contract reads. There are some schools in the girls hockey co-op who charge them an $85 participation fee because that's what's consistent with the rest of their programs, and so then the school picks up the balance. So it's not you have to charge this because the contract says so.
Okay.
I'll just add to that if you don't mind, and that
Yeah.
is might be new information for Dr. Bush. And that is hockey is the sport within our school district where there is a fee for families because of the ice fee. Otherwise, no other sport you will see that.
I just have one other thing that wasn't covered, and it's in revenue. This is a one-year contract, and so the end of 6 says that we're committing to revenue in the future. And so I have a problem with that being in this contract, which is a 23-24 year. Also not knowing exactly what the costs are going to be and what we're going to have to absorb as the primary. So I guess I would like to request that that line be taken out of this contract, mainly because it's referencing a different contract year than what this contract is. So if we're committing, we usually don't commit to a future year in a current contract when it's a one-year contract. So if that's okay with you all, not to say that we wouldn't do that in the future, but I think it's just something that I don't like to see in a current contract when we don't know all the lay of the land. So it says this revenue will be deducted from the total program costs in paragraph 7 beginning with the 2025 season. This is a 23-24 contract, not a 25 contract. And so we can put that in the 25 contract if we want to, but it's committing us for future revenue when we don't know what that's going to be. And so I would like to see that taken out of a 23-24 contract.
Can I just give you the rationale
Yeah,
just
sure.
for why it's there? So the way that our athletic revenue works from our ticket sales is that, so next year's money, 23-24, will actually roll into the athletic budget for 24-25. So the 2024 revenue that comes in from this sport, that's what it's referencing that would be applied to 2025, just for the backstory for why it's there.
I guess I just have some concerns about that too, just in terms of us administering a support when we know that there's more cost than what Andy has assigned to, that I think it's just a different revenue. I mean, people may differ as the board for sure, but I just have a problem with us putting that in for a first year and we don't really know what the costs are going to be and what that revenue is going to be. We don't have a sense of, is it something that we would decide to keep the revenue and take out the fixed cost that Andy has a percentage of? I think we have to compare those two things so that our costs are covered. That's just my personal opinion.
Can I discuss? So I guess the counterpoint would be that this is consistent with how we do every other sport if we're applying that revenue to the following year. So I just feel like this would be consistent, and I would not want to move away from being consistent with other sports.
Yeah, the difference here is that this is something that revenue is ours anyway, right? That this is saying we're giving it back to other school districts when we are still absorbing some costs associated with us being the funding entity or the person that's responsible. So I see that. I understand what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying. I just personally, I think that's revenue we're giving back, and we're also having conversations about our athletic department budget. So I don't think we should be committing ourselves about giving revenue to other school districts when we're funding more of this program and more of our kids are in this program. So I'm not saying it doesn't apply to our budget in the future, but we have to decide what we're deducting from what we're charging other schools. That's my only point, but again, that's just me.
I guess that I would add another point to that is when we looked at the numbers that we just heard from Brittany on participation, the majority of it are Oregon athletes. So the majority of that revenue would be deducting the cost of this program predominantly for Oregon. So I guess I'm comfortable leaving it in, knowing that that is how we have handled it for other agreements with other sports, like I'm assuming hockey, I think that has the same language in there. And the fact that if we go over in cost to run the program, that would be also segregated out and billed out to the partners of this agreement. So there isn't a risk really with us having to spend more other than documenting what has been spent and making sure that we're recouping those costs, and that the revenue generated from this program would directly benefit from the standpoint that we do have other schools that are benefiting from this program. So I'm okay with it, staying in the contract, but I understand your point.
Just to touch on the hockey comparison, there isn't actually any revenue sharing within our hockey cooperative contract. Stoughton actually keeps all of that gate revenue, but that's actually consistent with what they do in all their other sports. It goes into a general district-wide fund. It is not specific to athletics. So they're keeping with their current policies by choosing to do that. So I sought clarification on that actually the first time when we entered into that agreement. Hey, what about the gate revenues? So that's kind of what they're doing on that one.
But they don't charge indirect costs either.
do not
and
have-
that's another thing
correct.
that's important to note. They don't give back any gate revenues, but they also don't charge indirect costs to the other consortium participants.
All right, any other comments or questions? Then I'll entertain a motion. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Katie, can you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bijak? Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright? Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Okay, moving on to boys lacrosse resolution. Okay, it's pretty similar to the girls lacrosse, so I will entertain a motion to approve that resolution. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the boys lacrosse resolution? Okay, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Moving on to action item 4, which is boys lacrosse cooperative contract. So there's a little bit of change in the amount, so, right, correct? So I'll turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Yes, unfortunately, the amount that was in your Friday packet was actually the girls' amount. So you'll see an updated total because we have more male participants. And the updated total also includes the 4.3% of the package, which is part of the indirect costs. So that's why everything is a little more than you saw on Friday.
All right, any clarifying questions on boys lacrosse? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion. Is there a second? Any discussion? Anything you want to comment about boys lacrosse, Brittany?
No, it's identical in terms of the language.
Just one question. So with that kind of participation, are we having a JV1, JV2, and varsity? Is that the plan for boys lacrosse?
Probably. The way I like to do it is I kind of overschedule at one level, and then we kind of pick and choose an orange versus a black team is kind of how we differentiate.
Okay.
So that'll be consistent with kind of how we do it in like basketball and volleyball, where we have two at the same level.
Great. All right. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Stay there, Brittany. We got another one.
One more.
All right. Next is girls hockey cooperative contract. Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. I believe you saw this back in April, and there were some inconsistencies with the budget, and consequently we wanted to bring it back after Brittany had an opportunity to talk to the athletic director in Stoughton. So she can explain what you see here today. Just it's the same contract with updated budget numbers.
That's correct. Yeah, so the only real difference from what we saw before is they kind of merged some of their ice rental numbers on the last page there. And then they did kind of note at the bottom that their estimated budget was under what was actually spent on the program. So I think, Anna, this is kind of what you were referencing earlier. Within their athletic department, they have a hockey boosters. It's not like our booster club where it's all sports that are covered under its umbrella. It's specific to hockey. So within that contract, they agree that any excess is covered by that hockey boosters. But I think because the number was so large, Stoughton actually picked up some of it from their athletic department, and then the balance was covered by the hockey boosters. So like with our lacrosse, we don't have a lacrosse specific booster club, so we wouldn't be able to have similar language like that.
Okay, any questions from the board about girls hockey cooperative agreement? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion. Is there a second? All right, any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Can I just clarify, your motion was for this next year? This is a 23-25? Sorry. Okay, just wanna make sure. Got it, thank you. Ms. Wright? Yes. Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Thank you. You'll be busy.
She is.
Thank you, Brittany, for everything. It's a big year. Okay, moving on to action item 6, adoption of record retention schedules. I believe this
fascinating topic will be covered by our attorney, Ms. Jonan.
Right. It is fascinating and it's very important from a litigation standpoint and a storage standpoint, but not the most fascinating, I know, to everyone else. So this is something that was interesting. So the Public Records Board in Wisconsin governs the retention of documents, and they do an excellent job, and I understand, because we want to make sure that our history is preserved. And so in 2010, DPI put together a schedule for us that really encompassed every record I think they could think of that a school district might retain. And so that schedule was adopted by the board. And we do have a public records policy, Board Policy 152, and that schedule is in our administrative guidelines of what we follow. And so, but recently the Public Records Board instructed DPI to revise that schedule and only encompass records that were unique to school districts. So that meant now the 2023 schedule that's in your packet was very pared down. There's a number of documents that school districts have, but other places have as well, such as personnel records. And so, so DPI went through and did a record retention schedule for all the records they thought were unique to school districts. So that kept quite a gap in the records that are contained on the 2023 schedule. And that was at the instruction of the Public Records Board. And so, so then what DPI did, and you'll see that linked in the document, is they did a crosswalk for us to look at all of the different schedules that might encompass records that we use, but other state agencies use as well. And so what we are asking the board tonight, and you see there your 4 options there, is that we are recommending that the board adopt a records retention schedule. There's nothing that says we have to have a records retention schedule, but it is very helpful for us to have a systematic way to know how long we have to store documents and how much storage we need for that. And then also to comply with public records requests, because there are times that we don't have documents, and so it's helpful to show that there was a consistent means of why we don't have documents, that we didn't pick and choose what we keep and what we don't keep. So I highly recommend that we adopt a schedule tonight. This is something that attorneys all over the state in Wisconsin are working on with school districts, because if we adopt one, we do want to have something in place by June of 2023, by June 30th of 2023, because the schedule we have adopted will expire. And so I would say, in talking with the other districts that have looked at this, I think we have other districts that I have talked to have looked at the same recommendation, and that is option 4 that you will see here, that we do adopt DPI's schedule for the 2023 school records, because that is very helpful to us for records that are unique to us. So we're recommending that the board adopt that new schedule, but then in order to fill in those gaps, what we would like the board to adopt is that anything not on that schedule that we would save for 7 years. We feel that that is just a really simplistic way to do that. As you can imagine, every building in our district has records that they store and maintain. And so before things are not maintained, I do ask that they check with me, because we do have to notify the Public Records Board, and we want to make sure we're following what we have adopted. And so that is something that is very easy for me to explain to the buildings, that we need to keep things for 7 years. There is a storage component to that, because 7 years can be a long time. And at the same time, we're really trying to move as much as we can to electronic records for a number of reasons. And in checking with our director of technology, he feels that we have enough storage space electronically in order to do that. So I know you have a lot of detail in here that I did not go into, and I don't expect you all to have read it over the weekend, so I am more than happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Okay, I will open up the floor for questions for Gina about records. Go ahead, Leslie.
So I was just trying to look it up to see how our policy reads. Will this require us to go back and change anything about our policy?
It won't because it is in the administrative guidelines, so I can update those after the board takes action tonight.
Okay, so then the policy won't change. It'll just be the administrative guidelines part that changes for it. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Any other questions? Gina, I just have one. So do we have to maintain one or the other? So if you have an electronic record, you can destroy the hard copy, or is there some sort of qualification associated with that?
So it depends on the Public Records Board. There are some documents that they want an original. So for example, if we, like the purchase of the property, like the plat map that has the seal, that would be an area where I would say even though we do scan those, we had them electronically, I would say we should retain the original. But if it's something like a canceled voucher check, then, they give us guidance that yes, as long as we'd have that electronically, that it could be produced, that we don't need to save hard copies. So there is, again, like Wisconsin Retirement System reports, we have to save hard copies of those. So there is different records that have different guidance. But overall, we're okay as long as we save it electronically.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve the adoption of the record retention schedule as recommended to be the 2023 Schedule Plus. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Moving right along to action item number 7, approval of joining the social media class action. Back to you, Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. This is the same law firm that did the class action suit connected to Juul and vaping, that we were a part of that suit, and we received funds from that settlement. And we have spoken about the fact that we haven't yet decided how to spend those funds because they're specifically connected to prevention. And we know that we've been piloting a vape sensor or two, et cetera, that we can speak to you about at a later date. But now this particular law firm is doing a very similar suit for social media companies, directed at the idea that the companies and the access to social media has caused a mental health crisis among children. So I don't want to get too deep into anything legal without passing it off to the lawyer, but I just wanted you to make the connection between the Juul lawsuit and this one.
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. So this would be essentially the same type of lawsuit. It's considered a mass action or a class action lawsuit. So there's really no downside that I see for us joining. It doesn't cost us anything other than some time for several staff members to put together some data for the court to consider to show how this has impacted. So for example, with the Juul lawsuit, Amy Miller helped me with that, and we gathered documents, and I would say it probably took us about 10 hours each to answer that court questionnaire and compile the documents. So I anticipate this might be a little bit more in-depth, so I'm thinking about maybe 20 hours for each of us to compile the information. But if the suit is not successful, then it hasn't cost us anything other than that time and effort. And if it is successful, then we would be part of settlement monies that, again, we could look at spending on prevention or mental health. And so I know that is a priority that is very important to the board as well as the district. So I think it would be worth it if we could secure some dollars to help our students.
All right, I'll open it up for questions. Troy, anything?
I guess just a confirmation, I don't know if I read it, but so you think that if we do receive some proceeds that they would be we would have to designate them to prevention or mental health?
I don't know. It would really depend on if they're, so first the case would have to settle, which most class actions do, but some do go to trial. So then that would really depend on the settlement agreement. I would anticipate that given the nature of the allegations, I would anticipate that would be what the attorneys would be looking for in order to help school districts, but it would really be up to the settlement, which does have to be court approved. And then if it went to trial, then that's normally just monetary damages.
Okay, Thank you. That's all.
Any further questions? Okay, I will entertain a motion. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Gina. All right, moving on to 2023-2024 open enrollment, adding some additional spaces. So I'll turn that over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. As all of you know, in January of 2023, we came to you originally to approve open enrollment spaces, and then in June, we get to come back and potentially open up additional spaces if we believe we have room and we believe that there are people who are interested. So if table 2 with this particular document, you see that we have indeed come back to you to ask to open a few more seats in 4K, 6th, and 7th. So either Andy or Gina, whomever would like to talk about that process and how we got there.
So I'll start and I can look to Mr. Weiland to see what I missed, because I did want to point out that the purple in the packet has been updated since Friday. And so in terms of the reason that we are recommending that the board approve additional space in 4-year-old kindergarten as well as 6th and 7th grade. So the change that you will see is that we have even more space at 4K because Lindsay Engelhardt let me know this morning that in addition to Mariposa adding a 4K morning section, the Little Angels Early Learning Center has added an additional afternoon section. And then the Heart of Brooklyn previously had 10 spots in their afternoon section, and they have expanded that to 20. So that's 10 additional sections. So we do have more space than I originally thought on Friday. So I wanted to make sure you were aware of that addition, which is why we are recommending that we increase our 4K open enrollment, not only because often people who start at open enrollment do move into our district, so that helps us, as well as for open enrollment, it is a budget impact right away in year 1. And I can have Andy explain how that works in terms of state funding. So we feel that it is helpful, and we do feel very confident that we will have space for resident growth over the summer. And so you'll see that is why we're recommending 4K. We have 10 additional spots, but we're not recommending any additional spots for kindergarten because we've just seen historically that the kindergarten numbers do increase over the summer, and we want to make sure that we stay within our board guidelines. The reason we're looking at adding spaces available in 6th and 7th grade is that we do have space. We have a few students on the wait list for those grades, and we do have a larger 8th grade class that is moving out of the middle school, and the incoming 7th grade is smaller. So we do feel comfortable that we have space for those students should they choose to attend. But you'll also see that we're not opening up more spaces in grades 1 through 4 because we are approaching class guidelines in all of our schools. We have a little bit of room in Forest Edge, and so by not opening more spaces, that gives us some flexibility for students who are new to us, that if they do live in the northern part of Oregon, that they could go to Forest Edge if we do get close to those class guidelines.
So just for an update, Gina, so what is the 4K number that we're adding?
So our recommendation is that we increase 4K by 10 students, as you'll see in table 2. So 4K, we would like you to add 10 additional spaces. We do have more students than that on the wait list, but historically not everyone who gets accepted does actually end up attending. So there may be other students on the wait list that are accepted as other families decline. And then for 6th and 7th grade, we would propose adding 3 seats for 6th grade and 2 seats for 7th grade.
Okay, I just want to make sure the board has the updated copy, so it's 10, 3, and 2. Okay, any clarifying questions for Gina? Go ahead, Anna.
So I do have a question about I wanted to talk about some of the kind of the financial side of this. So you mentioned that we added a 4K with Mariposa and a 4K at Little Angels, and that Heart of Brooklyn is adding 10.
do we know, does that mean that we added staff beyond what was anticipated with our staffing plan? Or was this part of the staffing plan, kind of like a to be determined, but we're allocating this for the potential of additional sections? Is there a staffing impact associated with those 2 sections? And then what would that cost be? And what I'm trying to get at is whether the open enrollment really in fact covers us for the additional cost of those 2 teachers. And that to me demonstrates a value of that.
It's a great question. So for 4K, we are not the employer for the teachers. So that is something that the centers absorb and pay. Now we do pay them per pupil on a formula. So the centers really look at, is it affordable for them to add the section based on the money that we are giving them for their students? And so the ratio that is DPI required is a ratio of 10 to 1. So yes, for example, for Heart of Brooklyn, when they're going from 10 students to 20 students, then they do have to increase staff because the ratio is 10 to 1.
Okay.
So for 4K, the only staffing that we provide is we provide paraprofessionals that assist students that have programming and special education, as well as any other services they might need. So if a student needs speech or OT/PT, then we provide those professionals. But we don't provide the teacher or the teaching assistant for the classroom. So it's really for the center to look at if it's financially viable for them or not, based on the funding that we give them and that the state gives us for them. And so my understanding from talking to them is that they have added the sections because they felt that it was financially viable for them to do so. In addition, they also have wraparound care, which is then billed to the families. So that's another revenue source that they have that we don't have.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess I do have one other follow-up. I know one thing that we've talked about and we've been very cautious of with open enrollment is trying to not accept students who might need those special services because of capacity issues at that level. At the 4K level, I don't know that we've had a chance to identify those situations. So that may be a strain that could happen over time within the district. So I guess that's something we should be cognizant of.
And that's a great question. So by the Constitution, students are able to access services at age 3. So for many of the students, we are aware if they need special ed programming. And thank you for reminding me that we don't feel that we do have space for additional students that need special ed programming. All of our programs are full. And so yes, like that is one potential risk that we would be taking, is that a student may not be identified because maybe they're not in the area, or as 3-year-olds they didn't seek services. But in talking with Dr. Weidenstein and Lindsay Engelhardt, they felt really comfortable that we could open up the spaces, and if students are later identified, then we would be able to serve them. It's primarily speech and language that we look at because we try to do very early intervention. And the nice thing about speech and language is that students often know, if we do early intervention and then the students no longer need special speech and language because they have, we close it out. They don't need services anymore. And so that is something like we feel comfortable with opening these spaces that we could support them if that's what they needed.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Leslie. So, looking forward beyond this next year, if we were to fill these 10 spaces, it doesn't create a staffing issue this year, but would that cause an issue going forward?
So that's something we always look at because we want to be really careful, especially with kindergarten, that we have space. The nice thing about if we have an increased number of students is that we can be more flexible on our kindergarten section. So for example, at Brooklyn, we have 3 kindergarten sections, but if our numbers were such, we could have 4. And remember, for kindergarten, like we do the placements. And so you aren't guaranteed any particular school for kindergarten. So that's really helpful because we do look at transportation, but then we can help even out our class size numbers. And if we did need to add a section of kindergarten, if you think of 10 kids, and let's just say for ease of math, $9,000 per student that we receive, that's $90,000 for just 10 students. So that more than pays for that section. And that's only half the number of students that we would have in that section.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any further? Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, I guess just struggling a little bit with understanding some of these sections. So if I look at fourth grade, for example, we have a capacity of 350 students. We have a current enrollment of 281. So we have additional capacity of whatever, 69 students. Why would we hold our open enrollment at 5? What goes into that recommendation?
So we had to set that space in January, so we wanted to be very conservative, but then also we don't have any other students on the wait list and the application has passed. So there isn't any value in opening more sections because we don't have anyone else that we could
Gotcha.
admit.
Makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Great minds, Troy. I asked that earlier today. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve the administration's recommendation about new open enrollment spots. Is there a second? All right, any further discussion? Any further comments, Dr. Bergstrom?
I just wanted to note that when you looked at the current enrollment and you start at 4K and look at kindergarten, we're starting to see the impact of declining birth rates in Dane County. And so I think the fact that we have so many people who are interested in open enrolling in the younger grades is a really good sign.
All right.
I do have one comment,
Oh, go ahead.
actually. I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the things I was looking at. I looked at our Roffers report again, just to remind myself of where we were going with growth and what assumptions we based that on. And one of the things that I just looked at is, we're open enrolling potentially 30 students in 4K. Our pinch point really is more like that 7th, 8th grade. They're kindergarten, we're pretty good K through 6, but 7, 8 is getting kind of tight. By the time these kids are in 7th grade, we're looking at the year 2030, which is about the year that we talked about the potential need for additional expansion. So it actually kind of lines up well, and it brings in a revenue source for the district, and I just think it makes sense. So,
Yep. Great point, Anna. Thank you. All right, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Thank you, everybody. This is a lot more difficult than it looks in terms of statistical probabilities and growth and all sorts of different factors. So while it may just be a spreadsheet on a piece of paper, there's a lot of thought that goes on behind it with Dr. Bergstrom, Gina, and Andy. So thank you guys for working on that. And that is a really important revenue source for this district. So, okay, we are done with action items. So we are moving on to D, discussion items. Way to go, everybody. Okay, committee reports, policy. Heather is not here. Gina, do we have when's the next meeting scheduled for policy? Do you know?
We do. It is the first board meeting in July before the board meeting. So I just need to see. So July 10th.
Okay, so July 10th preceding the board meeting. Okay,
yes.
thank you. Vision steering, Anna.
yes, we will be meeting this Wednesday, and on our agenda is a review of the recreational facility study that has been underway for a little over a year, but we're still working on that. So that's the topic we will be discussing on Wednesday.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Anna. Moving on to E, information items, visioning and strategic planning, then teaching and learning, and then superintendent's report. So I will turn that over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. So as far as visioning and strategic planning goes, we know that the board has seen some of our drafts of the 3-year goals for the school district at the district level. And we're going to ASA, the Association for Wisconsin School Administrators, training for 3 days in June that will help us with refinement of the goal setting process and the development of indicators, etc. So I think you'll see our final draft post that experience, and we're all pretty excited about that. And our goals, the ones that we have sent into you in draft 2 form, are specifically connected to the board's 3-year priorities that were established last year. And now I'm going to move on to a really important teaching and learning update this evening. John Tanner is our Director of Learning and Student Achievement, and he was also the facilitator of the Human Growth and Development Committee that took place this spring. So John will begin.
forgot this one has. Oh, did I turn it on? Well, it's really close. All right, that works better, I think. So hello, thank you for your time this evening. I'm going to take a few minutes to give you an update of our Human Growth and Development Committee work. It was the ad hoc advisory committee, as you remember, and you'll be receiving a more detailed action plan for these recommendations in the near future, but tonight I just wanted to summarize the action plans that the committee came up with, or the recommendations. As a reminder, the committee had 14 members, and you can see the committee member composition on the screen there. The important thing to note is that the committee makeup aligns with what is prescribed by state statute. We had 4 committee meetings, and they were in March and April. And you can see here the high-level agenda and discussion topics for each meeting, which I'll just describe briefly. At our first meeting, it was focused on working together, and we discussed our goals and objectives and established some working agreements for how we wanted to work together and how we wanted to make decisions. We spent a significant amount of time discussing also the parameters that we had to operate under, which are prescribed fairly narrowly by the state statutes. So it was important for the group to be familiar with each other and also with that particular resource and those guidelines from the state. Our second meeting on March 21st, we reviewed a number of data pieces, such as the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which obviously provides a national overview of youth behavior, and that data goes back to 1990 and happens every 3 years. We also looked at the Dane County Youth Assessment Survey, which also goes back about 30 years. You've heard about that before. So we looked at that data. We also had Amy Miller provided a Oregon-specific disaggregation of much of the data too. So we got to look at the responses that are actually specifically from our students. The third meeting was about the curriculum overview, so it was focused on learning what the current human growth and development curriculum entails. So we heard from a school nurse and counselor who presented the grade 4 lessons, which they focus on protective behaviors, hygiene, and menstruation. It's not all human growth and development, but it does get into that part. And then we also heard from health teachers from grades 5 through 10 that presented to the committee. And then finally, during the fourth meeting, the committee prioritized updates and changes that we had developed based on data from the previous 3 meetings and also based on requests that we had received from the teachers who actually do the lessons. So the prioritized updates are the basis for the recommendations that I will share next. So this is the meat of it. The committee came up with 16 recommendations, and so this is a summary of them. Some were able to be combined, and either by action steps or by categories. So one really important thing to remember when you're looking at this is that these are the items that the committee recommends to either be changed or updated. So if something does not appear on this list, it means that there is not a change being recommended. It'll just stay as it is. And you'll see that these recommendations are organized into 4 main categories. The first category focuses on topics that they are taught in our curriculum, but they're not explicitly in the Human Growth and Development unit. So when the committee heard the presentations from the nurse, counselor, and the teachers, we were looking at rubrics, one from the district and one from the state, and we audited the units to make sure that all the required components were in there. And we didn't see necessarily all the required components. However, they are taught in other units of health because we only looked at the human growth and development units. So to be more clear with that, because we want people to know that we are meeting all the requirements, the recommendation is to identify and map the related curriculum lessons so that the connections are really drawn clearly. So here are the items that were included. So the first one is abusive head trauma. Now, this used to be called shaken baby syndrome, which is the term that I'm familiar with. And the reason it didn't show up when we were auditing is, one, we were looking for shaken baby syndrome, and it's called abusive head trauma. And also, this is no longer taught in the Human Growth and Development unit. It's taught in the Safety unit in grade 10. So it is taught, so it meets the state statute for that. It's just that it is not taught in the one narrow Human Growth and Development unit. The second topic in this area is stereotyping and bullying prevention, which is in all of our health classes, just not necessarily in the Human Growth and Development unit again. And this is also a really important topic, and so this exists not just in health or human growth and development, but it's in a lot of our other universal lessons that everybody gets, like social emotional learning lessons, counseling lessons, and the anti-hate speech lessons. And then the third topic in this area is about resources for sexual assault survivors. So this actually starts as early as 8th grade, and it's repeated again in 10th grade. And we also talk about it in connections. It's not listed as a specific lesson, like now we're going to talk about sexual assault survivors, but it is incorporated into those. So these lessons and these resources are provided within the health curriculum and the counseling curriculum. And so we don't talk about them just in human growth and development. So anyway, that category are things that we want to create that curriculum map and document it so that we can show where they're actually being met. The next category outlines some items that we looked at, which are updates or changes to the timing or sequence of like when we teach things. So they're things already taught. The first one is HIV, AIDS, and HPV. So these are required by the state to be taught, and these are currently taught in both 5th and 6th grade lessons. However, the state only requires them to be taught once, and there are many important topics, and so the health teachers requested and the committee recommends that we use the time to address some other relevant topics by only teaching that one once, which saves time for some of the other relevant things. The second area or topic for this is menstruation, and this is currently taught in 4th grade but only to girls. And the recommendation is to teach it to both boys and girls, but to teach it separately so that both groups can feel more comfortable asking questions of the teacher who is presenting it. The third one is about personal space, permission, and consent. We start talking about personal space in 4th grade, and we recommend coordinating the language of that to go from personal space and then permission for age-appropriate actions such as like, hey, can I give you a hug? You know, kids doing that. And then gradually working it up to consent, which is much more of a middle school, high school type topic. But we wanted some better coordination there to be sure that we're teaching the same type of lessons, but in a very age-appropriate way. Because it's the foundation of personal space. And then the last one is abstinence and preventing teen pregnancy and STIs, sexually transmitted infections. So the action point here is that we want to introduce medically accurate information about contraception methods in grade 8, emphasizing that abstinence is the only 100% reliable method for preventing pregnancy and STIs per state statute. And this is something that we want to start in grade 8, which currently is not offered until grade 10. The third category in here includes the topics that the committee felt were really important to increase or emphasize or augment in our human growth development curriculum. So the next step for all of these is to ensure that they're included either by creating some additional lessons when needed or identifying the connections where this topic currently exists, because these are all currently taught. The first is anxiety and depression, and when we did the review of the data from the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey and the Dane County Youth Assessment, they showed increases, really going back about 10 years and accelerating. So it's recommended to increase the knowledge about the symptoms of depression, the symptoms of anxiety. And then the next step to that, which just makes sense, is resilience and emotional awareness. So it's recommended to increase teaching these skills to help cope with some of the anxiety and depression that students are facing. And then another part that is based on the data that that the committee recommends increasing lessons on is identifying and exiting abusive relationships. So this is also based on data from National Youth Risk Behavior Survey and the Dane County Youth Assessment that students are encountering these, and so the recommendation is to add more age-appropriate lessons on how to identify and exit those types of relationships. Finally, the fourth category relates to increasing awareness and involvement with parents and guardians. The first step is to provide more information. So add human growth, recommendation is to add more human growth and development information to the district's website. And the second part is to add more lessons that encourage family and student discussions. And this came about because we have some of these, like a homework assignment that actually requires students to have a conversation with their parents about topics that parents probably should talk about but do not necessarily know how to start or finish. At least it was that way for me with my kids. And when we went through this, and I thought it was a great idea. But the data that we had from the Oregon-specific survey for Dane County Youth Assessment was that only 35% of Oregon middle school students and only 45% of Oregon high school students reported that they had what is, quote, a good talk, however they want to define that, with parents about waiting to have sex. And that's a fairly low percentage. So to help with this, the recommendation is to incorporate more lessons that encourage additional discussion between students and parents or guardians, along with providing more resources for the parents to know how to have those discussions. And that is the report on the recommendations. And like I said, you'll be getting a more detailed action plan written out for all these soon.
Great, thank you, John, very informative. Want to go around the horn and see if people have any questions? Troy, any? Leslie? Caleb? Anna?
Very, I think, quick ones, but is the human growth and development component, is that a portion of a health class? Or
Yes.
is it, so like it's just one section of the health class that students take?
Yes, thank you. I should have been more clear with that. Human growth and development is one unit typically in a semester or year health class.
Okay. And then when you were talking about that in the first category, other topics that are covered in other areas, those are also mandatory or required classes that kids are taking. They're not, because it's a requirement, so I assume those are required health classes, just different.
Yes.
Okay. That's all I wanted to verify. Thank you.
Just a couple of clarifying questions for me too, John. So when you talk about updating Timon and kind of a curriculum map, can you give us a little bit more information on that in terms of, does it mean that it's being taught in different times, but we're kind of putting them in the right order, or kind of knowing who's teaching what at what point in time?
Yeah, are you talking about the
Or is it more
second
about
the second
content?
category or the first one?
Well, I think both of them.
Okay.
Is it a curriculum map also timing?
Yeah, it can be.
Okay.
Yeah. So there were, these basically came from two different things. One, in the top category, it was when the teachers and the counselor and nurse presented their human growth and development unit, which is just one part of health. We were sitting there with the committee had checklists, both one from the state about the state health, like the requirement standards, and the state statutes that say what you have to cover. And then we had our own. And so some people were doing the state statute checklist, some people were doing the curriculum checklist, and there were a few items that like weren't in that human growth and development thing, but we know are taught, so they're taught just in a different place. An example of this is that the shaken baby syndrome used to be taught when students would get the mechanized babies, those of you who've had kids go through that. The mechanized babies have kind of gone away, and they've updated that curriculum, and so they actually moved that into the safety unit of that class. So these are things that we didn't initially see specifically called out in human growth and development, but we know it exists elsewhere. So what we want to do is make a little curriculum map that says, oh, we do have a checklist for this. It's just you don't necessarily see it in the lesson plans for human growth and development. So we just want to be clear on that for everybody. And then the second part, the updates to timing, I believe that all of those are actually requests from either the counselors, nurses, or teachers, where they wanted to shift when they teach something. So, or the order that they teach it in. So those are things that were already taught, but we're going to be changing sort of when it's taught.
And then my final question is, I know as a district that we always send something out to parents before these lessons are taught, but this piece that you're adding in terms of student-family discussion and kind of, so is that something that's going to enhance that communication, that you'll send it out, this is being taught, but then here are some resources for you to kind of come along with us?
Yes, absolutely. And we're actually working with the Oregon Cares group, because they have a variety of videos and parent resources on their website about how to have discussions about some things. Sex is not one of those currently, but that was one of the reasons why we brought this up is, hey, we should provide more resources for that. And so we're working with Oregon Cares and their whole parent focus to increase, just make it easier for parents to start those conversations and see a model of how to do it.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, John. Really good information.
Thank you.
For putting that work together and working with that committee. Okay, back to Dr. Bergstrom for superintendent report.
And there's a lot of good stuff tonight. And I also just want to take a moment to thank Mr. Tanner and thank all of the Human Growth and Development Committee members who met 4 times, a couple of hours each time, in order to do a really comprehensive review and make the recommendations that you heard here tonight. So the first thing you're going to see is are some pictures from the retirement celebration that we had in this room last week, because we have 10 really wonderful educators who have decided to make the next step into doing other things that they enjoy. And it's been really hard to say goodbye to all of them, but we're very, very appreciative of them and all of their service. And as a matter of fact, one of our retirees, Janet Pliner, was called out in a beautiful way in one of the student commencement speakers' speeches on Sunday afternoon, where he spoke about the fact that she connected him with a mentor when he was in middle school. And that was one of the things that made a really big difference for him. So just another plug-in for the graduation speakers. They were so good. Our students were great. And I just really appreciate everything that our retirees, this class of 2023, have done for our students. Another congratulations, and that is to our 2 soccer coaches, Chris Mitchell and Bobby Nichols. They were both awarded the FLAD Development and Investment Madison Area Sportsperson of the Year Award at the Madison Sports Hall of Fame Club. So this is quite a thing. I have actually attended one of these, not for my own recognition, trust me, before, but this is a very, very prestigious event for people who love sports, and it was quite the honor, and I think the first time that they've honored 2 coaches at once in this way. So I think this is a nod to the beautiful work that's being done by the coaching staff in the area of soccer, and really in the area of the development of young people into really good people. Learning about Memorial Day. This was kind of fun. Students across the district learned about Memorial Day, and some of the examples include lessons about the day at Prairie View and a special speaker from the American Legion Auxiliary at Brooklyn. And Netherwood students had some really cool hands-on learning in their arboretum. You can see them here checking, this is Miss Surgeon's first grade class, trying to water the class garden, planting some cucumbers and exploring nature, and some little ducks hatched in the Arboretum, which is an enclosed area, right? So the fact that a duck got in there, laid eggs, and is now raising a family in the Arboretum is pretty special. So the kids at this point are watching from the glass, or last week, were watching from the glass because the babies were true itty-bitty babies. And we wanted to make sure that they continue to grow and thrive in our Arboretum. Oh, and Prairie View, how fun is this? Some of our 4th grade students at Prairie View put their learning about energy to the test by building solar ovens from cardboard boxes. And then they tested the ovens by cooking marshmallows. Isn't that great? I know, the skill can come in very handy this summer, so thanks to Ms. Onsager and Ms. Kotke for continuing to engage students in these really relevant and empowering experiences right up until the end of the school year. Me too. Me too. Roasted marshmallows are my favorite. I also saw a group of students who, on the last day, maybe the second to last day of school, were outside testing rockets. I mean, teachers were really utilizing every last drop when it came to the time that they had with our kids. Forest Edge, students there worked with local Madison muralist Rodrigo Carapia, who you might remember from his exhibit in the Oregon High School Art Gallery for Hispanic Heritage Month. But he worked this time to celebrate multilingualism and multiculturalism at Forest Edge. And together they painted marigolds, a colorful forest, and a butterfly to represent the power and beauty of a culturally and linguistically diverse community. That's pretty beautiful. And then Mr. Schultz, a retired Brooklyn elementary teacher who was there for Walk of the Graduates. I don't know if I have spoken about this before, but I'll say it one more time. It's in a podcast, actually. Mr. Schultz came for the Walk of the Graduates at Brooklyn because this was the class that was coming back to walk that he had retired with. So he came back and stood at the exit of Brooklyn to give every single person an acknowledgement. Brooklyn is still a very important part of his life. And every spring he comes back and does a walking tour with the 4th graders, tours them around Brooklyn to make sure they understand the history of Brooklyn Elementary and the village of Brooklyn. And then this is another great thing that happened with our multilingual students. After nature tours and planting seedlings and gardening, some of our multilingual students from Miss Painter and Miss Springer's classes at Forest Edge celebrated the school year with their families at Fitchburg Farms. So they came together to share a meal and reflect on a great school year. I had no idea that this lovely space could be utilized in that way, and that gives me lots of cool ideas. So many thanks to them for this opportunity for our families. And our kindergarten students were able to practice phonics. Both our communications director, Ms. Mundinger, and I were able to be in this lovely kindergarten class for a podcast, and we stuck around to watch them do really great phonics work. It was an exciting thing to be able to see kindergartners switching their vowels in order to switch the meaning of the word, and it was just really fun to watch them, and they were energetic and happy, and I believe it was the second to last day of school.
Just one side note, for your kindergarten podcast, that was the cutest thing ever. And you asked, I don't know if you guys have listened to it, but she asked questions, and so it was the greatest quote from one of the kindergartners. They were asking about, what would you tell kindergartners coming in? She's like, you don't have to be afraid. It's going to be great. It was so cute.
That whole thing was oozing cuteness. I tell you, it was so sweet. And then at the end of it, I had all these wonderful kids giving me drawings to hang up in my office. I'm like, I just think I want to hang out here on a pretty regular basis. This was great. And then Netherwood's first grade class had a special painting project. So first semester student teacher, Miss Weaver, recently returned to Miss Bano's first grade class and brought along her mother, Miss Diane, who happens to be a watercolor artist. And together they treated the class to a special dandelion seed watercolor painting lesson. Isn't that sweet? And Brooklyn had a field day and did some teamwork activities. A whole bunch of different things were outside for the students to do to celebrate the successes that they had this year. Several of our schools had field days. The kids really enjoyed them. RCI students learned about summer reading. They had a visit from our Youth Services and Community Engagement librarian, Kelly Allen. She's wonderful, and she spoke with students about the Oregon Public Library Summer Reading Program and ways for students to stay engaged with reading and activities all summer long. It's so nice to see students at the RCI age engaged in what are they going to read over the summer, because that's the age when many students start doing that less and less. So it's really important that we keep them engaged in what are the books that they can't wait to read over the summer. The kindergartners were super ready to tell me, and that was great. They're mostly about animals, ducks, cats, unicorns, dogs. Yeah, it was very entertaining, but animals were their favorite. You can find details about our summer reading program on the Oregon Public Library website, and you can revisit episode 2 of the Inside the OSD podcast when Kelly Allen and Mark Lee spoke about books before winter break. And the goats. Saying a final goodbye to our goats. The last month has been filled with a ton of learning activities that involve the goats in the school forest. So OMS classes took advantage of the outdoors and the presence of the goats for a variety of things. It was exciting. They were writing poetry and stories, and they were inspired for different art projects and planting native species as part of the overall forest project. So those goats were very entertaining to have around, and that was a fun project that also demonstrated the sustainable way to clear out the invasive species in the forest. And it was so successful, I'm sure that we'll be talking about it for Worth Woods. Oregon middle school students in Mr. Howard's technology education class recently welcomed special guests who talked about what it's like to be an engineer. Students engaged in a treasure hunt in which they had to solve problems to reach an end destination, and the final step was to calculate the distance needed to catapult a ping pong ball into a bucket. This is another great way of ensuring that learning is rich right up until the very end. So thanks to the Oregon School District community members Ryan Bakken and Angela Seitz from Cummins for dedicating their time and talents to create this hands-on learning opportunity. We love it when we see the collective value of strong family and community partnerships in action. And then the German Club. Students in the Oregon Middle School German Club recently celebrated, Maifertag? We'll see if that was right. Miss Washetsky, you can call tomorrow and let me know if I messed that one up. Okay. A day dedicated to welcoming spring weather after a long, cold winter. Students learned how to construct a Maibaum, or maypole, along with traditional dances to decorate the pole with ribbons. They also made and ate German pretzels. And we had our OHS students attending the Justify Summit. That was back in May. That was a wonderful day. Many thanks to American Family who allowed us to hold the summit for Dane County students who were involved in the Justify Summit. There were well over 100 students there. You can see our representatives here, along with Miss Klaas and Mr. Piavanetti, and I was there for a good portion of the day too. This year's theme was Breaking Down Barriers, and included a really powerful keynote from State Representative Francesca Hong, along with breakout sessions designed to really empower student leaders and to provide resources for students that they can take back to their schools. And I was available to sit with the students when they did their debrief on this particular experience, and they took a lot away, a lot of thoughtful acknowledgement of things that are really positive, along with things that we can continue to improve to create the kind of culture that we want here at the high school. And then this is so cool. Congratulations to 59 students in Ms. Halverson's Spanish 5 class at Oregon High School who were awarded 14 college credits through UW Green Bay's College Credit in High School program. That's a whole semester, exactly. Through this program, high school students have the chance to receive college credit for classes taught by approved high school instructors, of which, of course, Ms. Halverson is one, and the credits are transferable to other universities. So the ability to be successful in the Spanish 5 class and to be successful on that exam really does save students an entire semester of college in some respects. And it's a great experience, right? It really prepares them for the rigor of what is next in their academic life. And congratulations to the OHS home construction class. Students from our home construction class recently had an open house. I believe it was a week from last Friday. Families of students and community members were invited to attend the showing and reception. We are so proud of our students, and the final product is living proof of their hard work and their skills mastered. It's a beautiful home, absolutely lovely finishes. The kids were fantastic. But what I was most impressed with when I did the podcast with them was when I asked them, what are you taking away from this experience? Their answers weren't necessarily about the specific skills. Their answers were about problem solving and working with other people. And that is exactly what we want them to take away from this, right? Because those are skills that will be applicable no matter their pathway ahead, and they are the type of lessons that if you learn them early enough, they are going to put you on a whole different pathway to success. Because we all know that there are people who take far too long to learn the importance of those two things. And then congratulations to our high school all-conference athletes. Look at all these kids who received high honors in baseball, golf, soccer, and softball. We're proud of all of them. And it's going to be really exciting to see where girls soccer goes this week with games on Thursday at 4:30. And I think if they win that, it will be Saturday at 1:30. And both will be at Uline in Milwaukee. Here we go. Same thing. I got a little ahead of myself a little bit. I've got some other things here. But congratulations to 5 of our OHS spring athletic teams who won Badger Conference championships. 5 teams. That is something. Girls soccer, softball, boys tennis, boys track and field, and girls track and field. What a spring for the Panthers. That's amazing. And then congratulations to all of our spring state qualifiers. As I said, girls soccer is qualified for the state tournament and will kick off Thursday at 4:30. Boys tennis sent 4 kids to state: Kyle Barnish, Charlie Barnish, Gordon Zhang, and Nick Schaefer. And track and field sent 16 kids to state. So congratulations to all of them. Hard work really does pay off. Understanding that you're a part of a team and you're all contributing to something greater, those are pretty amazing things. Then our last day of school was filled with bubbles and high fives and celebrations for those moving on. Every school has a tradition that's meant to be a way to celebrate kids as they're walking out the door for the last day of school for that particular grade. This is a really good picture. This is Netherwood saying goodbye. It really says it all, right? A lot of hugs, accolades for a great year, waving goodbye. I mean, the kids are really missed when they're away from us in the summer, and it's always kind of a countdown to when they come back. And then this weekend, we held the culminating event of the whole school district experience for our students, and that was the class of 2023 commencement ceremony. And it was really a wonderful ceremony, complete with performances by band and by choir and our amazing student speakers. They were, as I said before, they were so good. And of course, it was a celebration of 300 graduates, a little over that. Here are just a few of them pictured, but, we're proud of each and every one of them. And then finally, I want to remind you to keep tuning into the podcasts. We're going to keep producing them all summer. The most recent podcasts take you from kindergarten all the way to graduation. So during the last week of school, as I mentioned, I met with the kindergartners, but I also was able to sit down with our graduation speakers before the day of graduation. So you get to hear a little bit about what they were thinking regarding being speakers for their class, how they, the time and energy that they put into creating their speeches. This is really a pretty cool thing. They applied for the ability to have this role, and then once they were accepted, they met on a regular basis with one another, and they read one another's speeches and gave feedback to one another, and eventually they built it so that if you notice, those of you who were there on Sunday, one built on another, built on another. They connected the speeches together in some really cool and impressive ways. So they talk about that a little bit in the podcast, so I encourage you to tune in. I think you'll be really impressed with what they have to say. And that's it.
How about that? Pretty cool. All right. Moving on to F, closing. Future agenda. We will not have our second meeting of the month, so this board will not reconvene until the first meeting in July, which is July 10th. And then I will go around the horn for checkout. Troy, anything?
Yeah, you know, I did want to comment. Leslie covered a lot of kind of what I had in my notes, but flurry of activity this spring. Wow, like so much going on. And, you know, it was a few weeks ago, I was driving around and I noticed the graduation yard signs popping up. And I love that. You see that in the community, and I'm so proud to see our graduates be recognized. But it did remind me of our Portrait of a Graduate, this being our first full year of having the Portrait of a Graduate underway, and just reminded me of the interconnectedness of all of these great things that we do, all the opportunities that we provide for our learners to develop. Leslie covered all the success in athletics, but I also wanted to just recognize our beautiful facilities and Ron Novinska for just taking such good care of our fields. And you know, I'm really proud when we host home events and people from other communities come in and say, just wow, this is great. And I also want to recognize, we had a couple of student vocalists perform the national anthem at some of the athletic events this spring, and really, really awesome performances, really powerful. So again, really proud that we get to represent all of our students in different ways. Graduation was wonderful, flawless, and you know, we had a really good seat, so we got to see the all of the inner workings and how it's pulled off, and you know, kudos to the team that makes that happen. It was, from my opinion, flawless, and there was a point where we were getting ready, and we got to peek into the operations command center, and there is so much that goes into it to keep our families safe and comfortable and getting them in and out efficiently. So really, really impressive. And then also wanted to talk about the podcasts, one of my very favorite things. So from GOATs to kindergartners to seniors, just a really great way to get information out to this community. And then lastly, I just wanted to recognize our A-team. And we often see in the donations portion of our agenda that our A-team provides a scholarship to our students. And I just think it's really important that we recognize all of our A-team members who contribute to that. They not only contribute, you know, endless hours during the school day, and they give their hearts and souls to our students, but you know, they also contribute financially to keep that scholarship going and give our students, you know, some opportunities beyond high school. So really appreciate all that you do. So yeah, it's been a really great spring, great ending of the school year.
Great, thanks, Troy. Well said. Leslie. I don't think I have anything that can follow that. Caleb?
I don't have too much to say. I just wanted to say that I was able to go to my first graduation yesterday, right? Yesterday? And I really enjoyed it. I'm getting a little woozy from the the fumes from the floor. No, so yeah, I think it was yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was yesterday. So it was really enjoyable experience, and it was a lot of fun to be on that side of things. I was trying to remember the last high school graduation that I went to. Probably one of my siblings, I would guess. So it's been a long time, but it was a lot of fun, and a really cool experience to participate in. And I look forward to many more. Other than that, I don't have too much else to say. There's been a lot of stuff, and I'm interested to see. We've had a lot of things in the last couple days. Some decisions being made at the state level with money and budgets, and it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out in the coming weeks, but that's something to perhaps look forward to, so perhaps not. But that's it.
Appreciate your optimism. Anna? Okay, the board will now go into closed session. Thanks, everybody.